Well, I think there are parallels, though, Paul Connew. I think there are parallels between what happened in the late 70s when the unions caused Britain to be the sick and lazy man of Europe. We're seeing it again with talk of synchronised strikes. The bottom line is that we're running a budget deficit. We've got over £2.1 trillion worth of national debt. Inflation, more or less 10% and rising. We can't afford these pay increases, which is exactly what the unions want. What happens if the rail workers, the postal workers, civil servants and doctors all get what they want? The country, Paul Connew, will be broke.
They're not going to get exactly what they want, but they will get or fight to get. I suspect they will get somewhere nearer, certainly much nearer the current offers on the table, because we have a new Prime Minister coming in whose economic policies, as spelled out during the campaign, do not make sense. Very few economists and a lot of Tory MPs I know don't believe her policies stack up either. What she has been, assuming she's going to win, which looks virtually certain, although I think the margin of victory will be somewhat smaller than the polls predict, but she is going to have to face up to reality. So far, Liz Truss has been talking to that tiny, unrepresentative audience of the Tory party membership who represent less than half of 1% of the UK electorate. It's an absolute nonsense that another Prime Minister is imposed on the country by such an unrepresentative, tiny minority of the overall electorate of 47 million. We can't even find out exactly what the Tory party membership is. There's an interesting legal move being started by the Tortoise website, headed by the former Times editor and BBC director of news, James Harding, to actually try to force the Tory party to reveal what its membership figures really are, so we know precisely how many people are deciding our next Prime Minister, and also to find out what the percentage of Tory party membership are not British citizens either, who can vote for a Tory leader and a Prime Minister, but in many cases, are not in a position to vote in a general election. This is beyond satire.
All right, well, we'll have that conversation on another occasion. But, Professor, let me come back to you for your final thoughts on this. The bottom line is that the country is broke. These wage demands are unreasonable and the unions are irresponsible and must be actually put in their place and potentially through legislation.
Well, all that's nonsense. I mean, first of all, you said that Britain was
can we afford these pay rises?
In the 1970s, that's simply not true. It's not the trade unions who are ruining the country now. So let's get that into perspective. I think really, in a sense, if you go back to the 70s and the 80s, the first thing that Margaret Thatcher did was to recognise that the level of inflation, and she set up a number of commissions that paid the army 20% more, the police 20% more, they paid the teachers 20% more to get it sort of sorted out and then to level out. So even she recognised that you had to do that. Really, in a sense, to start blaming the unions, which for the failure of British industry to invest and properly invest and actually properly pay their people is simply nonsense and wrong.
Well, look, the country is broke. That's my view. We'll have to agree to disagree on that one.
Who's breaking this country? Who's not paying the amount? It's all right you saying this. You're blaming everything on 6 million trade unionists. There's a Conservative Party that's been in power for, since 2010. We need something, a party that recognises. I mean, if you build up and store up injustice after injustice, inadequate pay increases after pay increases, what are you going to do? But remember, each person, I go back to the point, each person who's not a pensioner, and even I'm a pensioner, but even is also a consumer as well as a producer.
Keith Laybourn.
And I go back to the previous speaker there on that, and that is that to a large extent, you've got there's a lot of support for people this time in a way perhaps there wasn't in 1979.
Keith Laybourn.
Yeah.
Keith Laybourn, I've only got a couple of seconds left and I want to come to Mark Spencer. But before you go, briefly, if you can, these wage demands, I mean, you don't accept that the country's broke. Well, we'll have to disagree on that one.
Well,
if these wage demands are fulfilled, what will that do to inflation? And who's going to be paying for it? Why should the grandchildren of my viewers have to tackle the cost of extraordinary wage demands of these workers, given the fact that any bonuses, any boost in wages will come from borrowing? It's more borrowed money.
We're taxing them, but we're not, because they get tax exemptions for investing in the North Sea. Come on, let's have a society where you recognise that. I mean, let's come back to the other thing. We're going to have increased poverty, fuel poverty. We should be addressing those questions. People should be being paid proper living wages. And you're saying the trade unions are to blame for it. No, they're nothing to do with it. It's other factors, and you know that very well.
They're asking for pay rises that the country cannot afford. A student in GCSE economics could understand that one.
Striking a negotiating position.
Deeply grateful for your time. Well, look, let's bring Mark Spencer back in. Mark,
all these prices. I mean, come on. You're asking people to accept 3% when it's 10, 12, 13, 14. And you're asking people who can't afford to live at the present time to face even larger. I mean, are we a nation of citizens and citizenship?
Wait a minute.
The nurses will offer 2 or 3%.
This is worse.
Releasing the control.
Order.
We need a more
Professor.
society, and it's about time you start to stop knocking the unions and recognise that the unions aren't the problem. We lose 28 billion days a year in industrial injuries. We lose up to 200 million days in people not employed.
Okay, Professor.
There are other things that need to be addressed.
Professor, final question to you before I come to Mark Spencer. Were you against the 3 national lockdowns that saw us close the economy for 2.5 years?
Sorry, who are you talking to?
You.
Sorry,
Keith Laybourn.
which national economies?
Did you speak out against lockdowns? Did you speak out against the 3 national lockdowns which forced the Treasury to borrow £500 billion?
When?
Over the last 2.5 years. We've just had a pandemic, in case you've forgotten.
No, what? In the pandemic?
Yes.
Oh, sorry,
did you object to lockdowns?
The pandemic. No, but I'll tell you what I was against. I was against the waste of money that went on. As we know, £12 billion on PPI equipment, which government pays £4 billion to people who can't even provide.
Okay,